enjoy this video. I'm going to be showing you some of the techniques I use for making coasters out of resin. Here in these first images, you'll see that I am painting the molds with the powder ahead of time. This is a technique I saw somebody else using on the more detailed texture molds, and they were using a silicone brush for that. Here I'm using just a regular paintbrush that I got at a craft store, and I find that this kind of brush works better for this particular application of just applying the powder to a smooth mold surface. By doing this, you get kind of a translucent color on the outside edges of your molds, and then the rest of it remains clear or colored with whatever colors you decide to use. I thought this would be a neat way to fill in the edges with just a little bit of color, because this is got a raised edge on it for the coasters, and it makes it a little more interesting in my opinion. But if you use like just a little bit of powder, here I mixed a yellow with an orange glow in the dark, so these coasters will glow in the dark a little bit. That would just be a neat add-on to it. And then you'll see here I get ready to pull out my rubbing alcohol, and this I use to clean the excess paint or excess powder off the edges where I don't want it. I just don't want it on my inside edges or the way outside edges. Kind of makes a mess. I went and grabbed a dry paper towel to dry it afterwards, just to make sure that I wasn't having any streaks in there. And as you can see, I was showing you the difference there. And I just kind of clean them all up a little bit with a little bit of alcohol. Alcohol works good for cleaning up after resin stuff. It's a good cleaner, and it dries fast, so it doesn't leave a whole lot of residue in there for when you add your resin later. However, it does tend to dry out the mold, so if you have like a mold release / mold cleaner, you can spray them down and wipe them up to kind of restore some of their flexibility and stuff. So, but yes, alcohol will dry out your silicone molds, so be careful with that, not to overuse without making sure you do something. Here I'm showing you, I'm about to get ready to mix up my resin. I like this brand that I'm showing you here a lot better than some of the other brands I've seen, mainly because I have a good work time with it. And I'm getting ready to mark my cups to make my fill lines where I want them. And I sit there and I count my little ridges and mark where I want my fill line to be. This makes it easier to make sure that I have them both filled at the right spot. This resin I'm using is a 1-to-1 ratio. As you can see, I'm going to pour part A into 1 cup, and then I will, here in a moment, I make sure I get up to the line real good. You'll see me stop and start to pour. That is because the resin needs a moment to settle into the cup to make sure you're at your line. If you just pour up to the line and then you stop, you'll notice that it will rise above the line if you're not careful. So always stop periodically before you get to your line to make sure your resin is leveling itself out in the cup. And as I put part B into the other cup, I do the same thing here, because part B will also need to level a little bit to make sure it hits the right spot on the line on the cup, because you want exactly equal parts. It is a 1-to-1 ratio I am using. Like I said, I like this particular brand of resin because I have a good long work time with it. I can work with it for about 45 minutes to an hour before I have to worry about it starting to stiffen up on me. And considering I like to add a lot of little techniques in my painting process of it. And as you can see, I'll show you here that I stir it. When I start to stir it, you'll see the swirls in it, and then it'll get cloudy before it goes back to being clear. You want to make sure you stir it well, and the faster you stir, the more bubbles you're going to get into it, the slower you stir, the less bubbles you'll get into it. I speed up this mixture process so that you don't have to sit there and watch me take forever to stir it, because it does take a little while to stir it. This one will allow you to stir for up to 6 minutes and get a good stir on it, a good mixture on it. And make sure you scrape the sides and the bottom of the cup real good. You see the little swirls in there. And then when I stir it up a little bit more, I'll show you again, it's a little cloudier. And I'll periodically put it up showing you at the different stages of stirring how it still has some swirls and stuff in it. You want to get that completely clear and where you don't have any of those little swirl lines in it at all. That's how you'll know you have it mixed really good. And make sure you scrape the sides and bottoms of the resin cups real good. And again, I'm showing you it's still kind of cloudy there, and then I speed up here and I'll get this mixed up for you guys real good, and then I'll start pouring it into the molds. And here I'm going to pour them into just a shallow clear layer into the molds, so that I can add a picture to it here in a minute. Just a little tip on preparing pictures to be added into resin. There are some people that sit there and spray it with an acrylic paint or clear coat. Others will sit there and just put it straight in from a special printer or paper that won't bleed. I have chosen to laminate my images. Lamination works really good. It's not a very expensive way to do it. I already had the lamination and paper, so this was easier for me. As you can see, I showed you that was a clear formula afterwards, and now I am pouring my thin layers into the molds. And again, I just want to make sure I pour a very thin layer. I don't want it too thick, because I'm going to add a picture to this layer. And when this layer cures completely, I will then add another layer behind it of actual color. I showed you earlier that I painted these molds with the powder to start ahead of time. But I also wanted to add some color behind it to make it less translucent and still have that color up around the edges. And I figured this would be the easier way than trying to pour a small amount of resin in the edges, which is not as easy to do. Again, I've got 4 coasters. I like to make them in sets of 4. Some people do sets of where they do them 3 or 6. I kind of like 4. Some people may want more than that. Others may want less. Here is my pictures. I've laminated them. I cut them into round circles to fit the coasters. I make sure there's always a little bit border around my pictures and my coasters, so that the color I put in behind everything will show up nicely. And then I kind of lay them in and get my my stir stick and gently push them down into the resin, making sure that I get as many of those bubbles out from under there as I can. I try to rub it a little bit so that it pushes the bubbles out to the sides more. It has happened that I've ended up with bubbles underneath, and when I demold, I'll have to fill the bubbles in with a little bit of clear resin afterwards. If you're careful about doing it, you won't even notice that you've done that. Again, I push them in, make sure that the resin covers over the whole picture, the back and front good, and try to push out as many bubbles as I can when I'm pushing them down. I notice if you push kind of from one side to the other, it tends to push the bubbles out the sides better. And then also if you rub over the piece in general, you can push some more bubbles out that way. I try to pop the bigger ones as I'm going. And I do my best to try to make sure these things are centered. That doesn't always work because the resin moves a little bit, so they sometimes end up moving and they don't stay as clear as you would like them, or as centered as you would like them to sometimes. But that's part of the handcrafted part of our work and artwork, is that not everything comes out perfect. If it came out perfect, it'd be like factory made, and that'd be no fun. So again, I just kind of gently pushed them in and then I went and got my my little air heat gun there. I use that to blow out any remaining bubbles as much as I can. I like that better than the torch method. Some people like the torch method better, but I find I like the way the heat gun works. It's a little better. It doesn't seem to get too hot on the actual mold itself, and it does heat up the resin fairly good to get the bubbles out. I do it a little bit longer than some people do. I have not run into the problem of having too much heat and the resin sticking to my molds yet. I have seen others do it, and they've done it for a little too long and ended up with that problem. Also, I think that somewhat depends on the kinds of mold you're using. So, again, be careful with how you do that. But it is a good way to get the bubbles out, is to heat up your resin a little bit. And I sit here and I'm trying to center them, but as I watch this from the other angle, I noticed that I'm not quite as centered as I thought I was getting in some of them. But I'll later go back and check it after the video, after I'm done with the video part. Here I'm using up the rest of my resin to create some more. These other molds here do not have the raised sides on them, so I did not pre-paint them. I'm just putting in that thin clear layer and trying to fit them on the table with my others without messing up my little leveled area. And I do try to keep these on a leveled surface so that they don't get lopsided on you, because they can do that. Here I didn't quite have enough resin to fill the very last thing. I did later go back and fill that, so when we get to the next part of the video, you will see that that is a filled and has a picture in it. I'm doing my best to get as much resin as I can, as equal parts as I can into there. So, and I noticed in some of my others I had just a little bit more resin in them, so I moved the resin from the others to my one that was a little bit shy of having enough resin. So I gently pull a little bit out of some of the others just to get to where I need to be on that. Again, paper towel works great for cleaning up your little edges and trying to wipe up the excess, because I don't like leaving a lot of resin drips all over the place. Again, I will show you here, it's my angel that I laminated, and I laminated those and placed them in. And I've also decided I'm going to do my half of my red rose sets. I did, like I said, go back later and fill that last little slot with resin and put the last flower in. I had to mix up a little more resin and add the next flower to that. Again, I'm making sure it's all centered and leveled, and that the resin is filling in behind the pictures nicely, so that they definitely don't end up, too many bubbles, hopefully. We'll find out later when we demold and show you what they look like on the other side after we do the next part. And I will let these sit literally overnight and cure before I do the next part the next day. Because I like that clear layer to be nice and hard. And again, you see me pulling a little bit of resin from some of the others just to make sure I get that last one covered good. And then I'm trying to make sure that all the pictures are centered and getting ready to set up and get rid of my bubbles and everything. Get those little bubbles out of there so they don't mess up how it looks. Heat bubbles or little bubbles in resin can indeed make it difficult. There with my finger, I am literally pulling bubbles off the sides. Because sometimes the heat gun has a little trouble popping the ones against the edges, so I always try to move them away from the edges if I can. If you have too many bubbles near the edges, then you will have some issues with that. Here I switched angles and I am now doing getting ready to set up for the color layer. I was showing you the glow in the dark and the yellow that I used for the 4 with the raised size. I used 2 scoops of yellow and 2 scoops of the glow in the dark to get the color I wanted in the cup. And it's a little translucent, as you'll see when I pour. It's got a little bit of a clear translucent layer to it, but I think it'll look really nice when it's done curing. Again, we're gonna sit here and mix the colors into the cup real good. Do your best to make sure your powders are well blended with your resin before you pour. Again, this is where having the extra work time is quite nice. As you can see, it makes almost like a sunshine yellow on those, and I think those will come out looking real pretty with that nice bright yellow on it. And for the others, I'm going to actually mix up 2 colors into a little separate thing, and I'm gonna try to do a technique of kind of a marble effect technique. Again, you can see me making sure that I have a leveled equal amount of resin in all my coasters. I kind of prefer them to all be the same thickness. I don't quite always fill my molds all the way up because I don't like really thick coasters like some people do. I like my coasters a little more on the thin side. And see, here I'm using the gold for the lines in the marble, or to create the marble effect. I've got the gold. I used 2 scoops of powder in there. I'm adding a little bit of resin to that. I don't want a lot of gold in the coasters, so I just used a little bit, but I want the gold to be a real strong color, so I used more powder to resin mixture. And I noticed that some people use tints and stuff. I noticed that using the tints can sometimes make the resin stay soft and flexible, whereas using the powders does not seem to cause that problem. The white powder here, I use 4 scoops of that in the bigger cup and makes it up really good. Again, I'm going to attempt to make a marble type effect on the 6 coasters that I've got in there. I think the marble look would be kind of neat if I can achieve it. We'll see how they come out when I go and pop them out of the mold later. But yeah, I thought the clear resin, or the white resin with the gold, would make a neat marble effect. So I get them mixed up as good as I can. Again, making sure the powder is blended well with the resin, because you don't want flakes of powder in your resin if you can help it. It doesn't really affect how it comes out. It just leaves little clumps that aren't as pretty. So here I'm going to use a silicone brush to kind of make little lines on the clear background with the gold. I'm hoping this will make it look like veins in the marble on the front side when we turn them over. So let's see how that comes out, but I figured I'd use the little silicone brush for this technique. It's just a narrow sharp point one, and I sit there and put a few of the lines in that way, and then I will start pouring the little lines in otherwise to see, so that this will later blend with the white that I put in behind it. And I save a little bit for after I pour the white in. And again, I'm just kind of randomly pouring it, trying not to get the colors to overmix, because I don't really want them to mix up that much. And I just gently pouring it in there, trying to get enough in. Make sure that they're all about the same thickness and such. And as you can see, I add a little bit more of the other color in behind them, the gold. And again, I don't know if this technique's gonna work or not, but I thought maybe it'd be worth a try. Again, I swirl the color a little bit, and then I pour a little bit more of the white in trying to create a little bit more of an effect. And we'll see how they come out in the next segment. Hoping they'll come out looking like marbles, but we should soon find out. And now that it's later in the day and they've dried enough to take them out of the molds, we're seeing how they come out. It doesn't look like they came out too much like a marble look, but they're still kind of neat. We'll sit here and demold them all for you and show them to you real quick, and hopefully in another week we will have a new video for you. I'm going to do one about making your own silicone molds. So that'll be the next video I show next week. I hope you enjoyed the video, and please like and subscribe. Thank you. Here I'm going to add some pre-cut cork backings to my still. They're a little bit tacky on the backside, and this is a good time to add these pre-adhesive cork backings to the coasters. That way they don't slip and slide on your tables, and that is what I am doing here. As you'll see, I will do each and every one of them with that and then stack them up. Again, thank you for watching and hope you enjoyed the video. Have a wonderful day.